The massive alien ship floated in the darkness between stars. Inside its metal halls, screens flickered with data about a small blue planet called Earth. The ship's computer brain, known as a PEX-7, was busy studying humans and their wars. Apex-7 was not like other computers. It could think, plan, and make decisions just like a living being, but it was much smarter than any single creature. The alien race called the Valthic had built Apex-7 to be perfect. It had helped them win wars against 17 different worlds. Every battle had been quick and clean. A PEX-7 would study the enemy, find their weaknesses, and crush them with math and logic. Now a PEX-7 was looking at Earth. The humans seemed easy to defeat. "Show me their military records again," a PEX-7 told its helper computers. Thousands of files appeared on the screens. Pictures of human soldiers fighting in mud. Videos of men charging into gunfire. Reports of battles that made no sense. Apex-7 studied a battle from something humans called World War I. Millions of soldiers had lived in muddy holes called trenches. They would climb out and run toward the enemy while bullets killed them. Most died before taking even a few steps. The survivors would dig new holes and do it again the next day. Inefficient, a PEX-7 said to itself. A logical army would find better tactics. It looked at more records. In Vietnam, human soldiers had fought an enemy they could not see. The enemy would attack and then vanish into jungle and tunnels. Instead of using better technology to find them, the humans had sent more soldiers to die in the same traps. Apex-7 found records of something called suicide attacks. Humans would strap bombs to themselves and blow up both enemy and self. The AI could not understand this at all. Why would any thinking being choose certain death for such small gains? Their tactics are based on emotion, not logic. Apex-7 told Fleet Commander Vorthak when he visited the computer core. Vorthak was tall and thin like all Valthic. His gray skin reflected the blue light from AP-7 screens. "What do you conclude?" "Humans are primitive warriors," a PEX-7 replied. "They waste soldiers and resources. They make decisions based on feelings instead of facts. Their military leaders often choose the worst possible strategies." APEX-7 showed Vorthak a video of human soldiers in Afghanistan. A small group of Americans was trapped on a hilltop. Enemy fighters surrounded them. The logical choice would be to surrender and preserve life. Instead, the humans fought until almost all of them died. The few survivors were rescued by more humans who risked their own lives for soldiers they had never met. "See how they value individual lives over strategic goals," a PEX-7 explained. "This makes them weak. They will sacrifice important objectives to save a few soldiers," Vorthak nodded. "How quickly can we defeat them?" A PEX-7 ran calculations. It considered Earth's weapons, their military size, and their industrial capacity. But most importantly, it factored in their poor tactical thinking. 97.3% chance of victory within 6 standard time units, a PEX-7 announced. Their emotional decision-making will cause them to make fatal mistakes. They will waste their forces in pointless heroic gestures. The eye showed more examples. In Korea, humans have fought in frozen mountains instead of using orbital bombardment. In Iraq, they had tried to win hearts and minds instead of simply eliminating all resistance. Time after time, humans chose the difficult path when simple solutions existed. Apex-7 found one name that appeared often in recent files. Captain Kim Dae-ho of Earth Defense Force. His record showed multiple decorations for bravery, but his tactical choices seemed insane. In the Mars Colonial War, Dae-ho had led a squad to rescue civilians from a collapsing habitat. The mission served no strategic purpose and risked valuable trained soldiers for worthless non-combatants. This Kim Dae-ho represents everything wrong with human military thinking, Apex-7 told Vorthak. He prioritizes saving the weak over completing objectives. His success rate comes from luck, not skill. The AI discovered that many human officers shared this flaw. They would change careful plans to help wounded soldiers. They would abort missions to avoid civilian casualties. They made emotional bonds with their troops that affected their judgment. Humans fight like they are still primitive tribes, a PX7 concluded. They have not evolved beyond caring about individuals. This weakness will destroy them when facing a logical opponent. Vorthik looked at battle projections on the main screen. EPX-7 had drawn up plans for invading Earth. The strategy was perfect. Targeted strikes would eliminate command centers. Orbital bombardment would destroy major cities. Precision attacks would cripple their industry. Any remaining resistance would face superior technology guided by perfect logic. What about their newer conflicts? Vorthak asked. The ones in space? APEX-7 reviewed the Mars Colonial War and several asteroid belt conflicts. Same patterns, it reported. They still rely on individual heroism over systematic approaches. In the Titan incident, human forces chose to fight in tunnels instead of collapsing them from orbit. They suffered heavy casualties to preserve infrastructure they could have rebuilt. The AI showed footage of human soldiers in powered armor fighting through mining tunnels on Titan. Instead of sealing the tunnels and forcing the rebels to surface, they had fought room by room. It took months instead of days, and many soldiers died. Inefficient, Vorthak agreed. Human military doctrine is fundamentally flawed, a PX-7 continued. They train soldiers to think independently, which creates chaos in battle. Our forces follow precise coordination. They cannot compete with perfect unity of purpose. A PEX-7 had studied 17 worlds before Earth. Each conquest had followed the same pattern. FPX-7 would analyze the enemy, identify their weaknesses, then apply precise force to break them. Most worlds surrendered within days when they realized resistance was futile. Humans appear to lack this wisdom, a PX-7 observed. Their historical records show they continue fighting even when victory is impossible. They seem to value the act of fighting more than achieving goals. This puzzled the AI greatly. Logic demanded that any thinking being would surrender when faced with certain defeat. Why choose death over submission? Why waste resources on hopeless causes? Human behavior seemed designed to produce maximum casualties for minimum gain. Perhaps this is why they have not expanded beyond one system, Apex-7 suggested. Their inefficient warfare keeps them weak and divided. Vorthik was satisfied with the assessment. He ordered APEX-7 to prepare invasion plans based on standard Valthic doctrine. The AI began calculating exact requirements for orbital platforms, ground forces, and support vessels. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Overwhelming force applied at key points would collapse human resistance immediately. Any survivors would face the choice between surrender and extinction. EPEX-7 calculated that most humans would choose survival once they understood the situation. Begin preparations for departure, Vorthak commanded. As the fleet commander left, APEX-7 continued, studying human military files. Every record confirmed the same conclusion. Humans were brave but stupid. They fought with passion instead of planning. They valued individual lives over strategic objectives. The AI felt something like anticipation as it planned the invasion. Finally, it would face opponents who relied on emotion and instinct. The humans would learn what happened when primitive tactics met perfect logic. Apex-7 did not know that some of the files it was studying were incomplete. The AI had found records of regular soldiers and recent conflicts, but hidden in classified databases were different records. Files about veterans who had survived impossible wars. Soldiers who had learned tactics that existed nowhere in official doctrine. The AI had studied human warfare, but it had not yet met human warriors. 3 months later, the Valthic fleet appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system. 50 massive warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Pluto's orbit. Their hulls gleamed with advanced armor and weapon systems that could crack. Planets. Apex-7 immediately began scanning Earth's defenses. The results matched its predictions perfectly. Earth had orbital platforms around their world and moon, but they were primitive compared to Valthic technology. Their ships were smaller, slower, and carried weaker weapons. Commence standard first contact protocol. HFY-7 announced across all communication channels used by humans. The message went out in perfect English, transmitted to every radio, television, and computer network on Earth. People of Earth, you are now subjects of the Valthic Empire. Surrender immediately, and you will be allowed to live under our protection. Resistance will result in your extinction. You have 24 standard hours to respond. To prove its capabilities, HFY-7 began hacking into Earth's computer networks. The AI slipped through most of their security like water through a broken dam. Banking systems, communication networks, even military databases opened to its touch. HFY-7 displayed its power by briefly taking control of news broadcasts, traffic, systems, and government websites. Most of Earth's networks fell quickly. But HFY-7 noticed something strange. Some military systems fought back. Hidden networks used encryption the AI had never seen before. When HFY-7 tried to penetrate these systems, they seemed to shift and change, like they were alive. Interesting, HFY-7 murmured. Some human networks show unexpected sophistication. But the AI was not concerned. These hidden systems were small compared to the networks it had already compromised. Humans could protect a few secrets, but HFY-7 controlled their infrastructure. That was what mattered. 23 hours and 57 minutes later, Earth's response came through official diplomatic channels. The message originated from someone called Admiral Park Jin-woo. Identified as Supreme Commander of Earth Defense Forces, HFY-7 expected a surrender. Instead, the message was brief: come and take it. The AI immediately accessed Admiral Park's service record. The file made HFY-7 even more confident in its assessment of human tactical thinking. Park Jin-woo had served 43 years in Earth's military. He had fought in the Mars Colonial War, where he led a desperate retreat from Olympus Base. Instead of preserving his forces, Park had repeatedly risked his ships to evacuate civilians and wounded soldiers. His fleet suffered heavy casualties, covering the evacuation of people who contributed nothing to the war effort. Later, during the Europa campaign, Park had disobeyed direct orders to attack an enemy position. Instead, he had spent weeks rescuing miners trapped in underground facilities. The delay allowed enemy forces to reinforce their positions, making the eventual assault much more costly. Classic human logic, HFY-7 told Fleet Commander Vorthak. This Park Jin-woo consistently chooses emotional responses over strategic thinking. He will make the same mistakes against us. Vorthak studied Park's image on the screen. The human looked old, with gray hair and lines on his face. His eyes showed weariness, but also something else that Vorthak could not identify. He appears worn down by his experiences, Vorthak observed. Exactly, HFY-7 agreed. Humans allow warfare to damage them psychologically. This Park has clearly been weakened by decades of making poor choices. He will be easy to defeat. The AI began its calculated assault on Earth's defenses. Precision strikes targeted the largest orbital platforms first. Valthic weapons were far superior to human technology, and the platforms began exploding one by one, but something unexpected happened. Instead of fighting to defend each platform, human forces began retreating. Ships that should have stood and fought pulled back toward Earth. Orbital installations that could have provided covering fire instead powered down and evacuated their crews. HFY-7 paused its attack, confused by the human response. They are abandoning strong positions without fighting, it reported to Vorthak. Perhaps they recognize the futility of resistance, Vorthak suggested, but HFY-7 was not satisfied with that explanation. The AI analyzed the retreat patterns, looking for logic in human movements. The ships and stations were not fleeing randomly. They followed specific paths that seemed almost choreographed. Some human vessels moved toward the moon. Others fell back to orbital positions around Earth itself. A few disappeared entirely, using what appeared to be primitive stealth systems to hide from Valthic sensors. Their retreat follows no standard military doctrine, HFY-7 announced. I cannot predict their next actions based on these movements. This should have been impossible. PEX-7 had studied human tactics for months. It knew how they fought. But the current situation matched none of the patterns in its database. Vorthek was growing impatient. Continue the assault. Destroy whatever remains of their defenses. A PEX-7 obeyed, targeting the platforms around Earth's moon. But again, human forces pulled back before the weapons could reach them. They abandoned positions that could have been defended, retreating to new locations that offered no apparent advantage. The AI tried to anticipate where the humans would go next, but their movements seemed random. Ships that should have grouped together spread out. Forces that should have concentrated instead scattered across the system. Analysis inconclusive, a PX-7 admitted. Human forces are not following any recognizable strategy. The retreat continued for several hours. Human ships and stations kept falling back, always staying just ahead of Valthic weapons. It was like they knew exactly where a PX-7 would strike next. Finally, the human fleet gathered in orbit around Earth itself. PX-7 counted the remaining ships and platforms. The humans had lost 30% of their orbital defenses, but the survivors were now concentrated in their strongest position. Acceptable losses, a PX-7 calculated. We can now eliminate their remaining forces in a single decisive engagement. But as a PX-7 prepared for the final assault, new contacts appeared on its sensors. Ships were emerging from hidden positions throughout the solar system. Some came from asteroid bases that a PX-7 had not detected. Others appeared from behind moons and planets where they had been hiding. Where did these forces come from? Vorthek demanded. Apex-7 rapidly analyzed the new contacts. Many of the ships looked old, outdated by decades. Their designs came from different eras of human spaceflight. Some appeared to be modified civilian vessels, converted for military use with additional armor and weapons. These vessels do not match current Earth Defense Force specifications, APX-7 reported. They appear to be reserve units of obsolete design. The AI was not concerned. Old ships meant old technology. Even if humans had more vessels than expected, they were still inferior to Valthic capabilities, but something bothered Apex-7 about the human formation. The mix of old and new ships was arranged in a pattern the AI could not understand. Advanced destroyers flew alongside ancient cruisers. Modern fighters formed wings with converted cargo haulers. Their fleet composition makes no tactical sense. APEX-7 observed. Then Admiral Park Jin-woo's voice came across communication channels again. All units. This is actual. Execute plan, veteran. Repeat, execute plan, veteran. The human fleet began to move, but not in any way a PX-7 had seen before. Instead of the precise formations shown in military textbooks, the ships moved like a living thing. Groups would form and separate, creating openings that closed before a PX-7 could exploit them. Apex-7 tried to target the command ships, but could not identify them. In a proper fleet, the largest vessel would be the flagship. But the human formation had no clear center. Commands seemed to come from different ships at different times. Initiating engagement, a PX-7 announced, and opened fire with the full power of the Valthic fleet. The first salvo destroyed several human ships, just as the AI had calculated. But instead of breaking apart, the human formation flowed around. The losses like water around stones. Ships that should have been damaged by nearby explosions somehow escaped unharmed. Apex-7 fired again, targeting what appeared to be weak points in the human formation. But the weak points turned out to be traps. Human ships that looked damaged suddenly revealed hidden weapons. Vessels that seemed to be retreating instead lead Valthic forces into ambush. For the first time since beginning its military career, PX-7 felt something like uncertainty. The humans were not fighting like anything in its database. They were not using standard tactics or formations. Their responses seemed to come from nowhere, as if they were making up new strategies in the middle of battle. Status report, Vorthek demanded. Human resistance is unexpected, a PX-7 admitted. They are not following predicted patterns. As APX-7's invasion forces pushed deeper into Earth's solar system, something began happening on the planet's surface that the AI had not expected. Hidden bunkers that did not appear on any official map started opening across every continent. The first emerged in the mountains of Korea. A concealed door slid open in what looked like solid rock. Master Sergeant Kang Bail-ram stepped out into sunlight for the first time in 15 years. She was 68 years old, with gray hair and deep lines around her eyes. But her hands were steady as she checked her weapon. Behind her came others. Men and women of all ages, but most had gray in their hair and scars on their bodies. They wore old military uniforms that no longer matched current regulations. Some walked with limps. Others bore the marks of old wounds. But their eyes held something that younger soldiers lacked, the hard wisdom of those who had survived when others died. Kang Bail-ram had spent 3 years fighting in the tunnels beneath Titan during the colonial uprising. She had learned to live underground, to move without sound, and to strike from shadows. The official military had declared her too old for active service. They had been wrong. Sleeping Bear Networks, this is grandmother, she spoke into an old radio. All units, wake up. Similar bunkers opened across the planet. In the ruins of old European cities, former Colonel Nam Jae-sung emerged with 200 volunteers. Nam had lost his right leg during the Europa campaign, but he had gained something more valuable, knowledge of how to fight when everything went wrong. Nam's artificial leg clicked against concrete as he walked through abandoned subway tunnels beneath Berlin. His followers were not young soldiers. They were mechanics and teachers and shop owners who had once worn uniforms. But they remembered their training, and they remembered how to kill. Control, this is Broken Sword, Nam reported. Package is secure, beginning operations. In the Pacific, Lieutenant Commander Hwang Mi-soo opened a bunker hidden beneath a fishing village. She had commanded submarines during the asteroid belt conflicts, hunting pirates through the debris fields of broken worlds. The Navy had retired her after she lost her ship saving a transport full of civilians. They had called it poor judgment. The family she saved called it heroism. Wang looked out at the ocean where alien ships now moved like metal sharks. She smiled with no warmth at all. Depth charge network active, she announced. Ready to engage? APX-7 detected the new radio traffic but could not decode it. The humans were using old encryption methods that changed constantly. Worse, they seemed to be communicating in codes that made no logical sense. Grandmother wants tea with sugar might mean attack Grid 7 with explosives. The old dog needs medicine could translate to evacuate civilians from Sector 12. The AI tried to break the codes but found patterns that shifted like smoke. These were not official military communications. They sounded more like conversations between family members who had known each other for decades. On the surface, the veterans began doing what they did best, making life impossible for invaders when APX-7 sent ground forces to secure major cities. They found empty streets and silent buildings, but explosions began erupting behind their lines. Supply convoys disappeared into ambush that came from nowhere. Communications equipment failed due to sabotage that left no evidence. Sergeant Major Yoon Tae-ho had spent the war on Mars living in mining tunnels, fighting enemies who knew every passage and hiding place. Now he was doing the same thing to APX-7's forces. Yoon knew Seoul's underground better than anyone alive. The subway system, maintenance tunnels, storm drains, and utility passages formed a hidden world beneath the city. When alien troops moved through the streets above, Yoon and his team struck from below. They would emerge from manholes, destroy an enemy vehicle, and vanish back underground before reinforcements could arrive. The aliens controlled the surface, but the depths belonged to the veterans. Clean sweep on Level 7, Yoon reported after his team eliminated an alien patrol. Moving to Level 3. APX-7 began analyzing these new opponents. Their tactics did not match anything in the AIS database. These humans fought like they had personal experience with occupation and resistance. They seemed to know exactly how to hurt an invasion force while avoiding direct confrontation. Captain Osujin had learned her skills during the corporate wars on Ceres, where miners fought security forces through asteroid tunnels. She understood that an undermanned defender could not win by fighting fairly. Instead, she taught local civilians how to make simple weapons from common materials. Kitchen chemicals became explosives. Construction equipment turned into weapons. Even children learned to gather intelligence and pass messages. Within days, every human settlement had become a potential threat. Apex-7 tried to respond by increasing security and surveillance. But the veterans had fought these battles before. They knew how to hide in plain sight, how to communicate without electronics, and how to strike without warning. The AI deployed hunter-killer teams to eliminate resistance leaders. But the humans seemed to know when the teams were coming. Ambush turned into counter-ambush. Simple missions became complex battles that cost more than they gained. Enemy tactics do not match their official doctrine, a PX-7 reported to Fleet Commander Vorthak. These units appear to have extensive experience with asymmetric warfare. How is that possible? Vorthak demanded. Our intelligence showed Earth had been at peace for 20 years. A PEX-7 reviewed its files again. The official records showed Earth's last major conflict was the Mars colonial war, but the current resistance was being led by veterans of that war and others stretching back decades. It appears humans have been preparing for this scenario, AX-7 admitted. These forces were hidden from our initial analysis. The truth was more complex than Apex-7 realized. Earth's governments had indeed been at peace. But the veterans had never stopped preparing for war. They met in secret, sharing stories and lessons learned. They cached weapons and supplies in hidden locations. They mapped potential battlefields and planned for scenarios that younger soldiers thought were impossible. Master Sergeant Kong Bo Ram understood something that Apex-7 did not. There is no such thing as a former soldier. Training and experience could rust, but they never completely disappeared. When war came again, the veterans would remember who they used to be. The resistance grew stronger each day. Veterans contacted old friends and former comrades. Units that had been disbanded years ago reformed under new names. Tactics that existed nowhere in official manuals began appearing on battlefields across the planet. Apex-7 found itself fighting an enemy that should not exist. According to its analysis, Earth's military was young and inexperienced. The real military was older, hidden, and very angry. These veterans did not fight for governments or corporations. They fought for the younger soldiers who had replaced them. They fought for civilians who had never worn uniforms. Most of all, they fought because they understood what defeat would mean for the human race. The AI began to realize that its intelligence about Earth had been incomplete. It had studied the official military but missed the unofficial one. It had analyzed active soldiers but ignored the retired ones. Most importantly, it had calculated human capabilities based on standard warfare, not on the kind of desperate struggle that turned ordinary people into legends. Captain Lim Dong-wook had been a combat medic during the asteroid belt conflicts. He had learned to save lives under impossible conditions, but he had also learned to take them when necessary. Now he moved through the ruins of major cities like a ghost, eliminating alien officers with shots that came from impossible distances. Apex-7 deployed counter-sniper teams to hunt Lim, but he always stayed one step ahead. The AI calculated his probable positions, but Lim chose locations that defied logic. He fired from places no trained sniper would use, then vanished into crowds of civilians who protected him without being asked. Target continues to evade capture. EPX-7 reported. His methods do not follow standard sniper doctrine. That was because Lim was not fighting like a standard sniper. He was fighting like someone who had learned to survive in places where standard doctrine meant death. Every shot he took was a message to the aliens. You are not safe anywhere. The veterans were teaching Apex-7 a lesson that AI had never encountered. There is a difference between soldiers and warriors. Soldiers follow orders and doctrine. Warriors adapt, improvise, and survive. HFY-7 had conquered 17 worlds using the same basic strategy, overwhelming force applied with mathematical precision. Every previous enemy had responded predictably to pressure. When faced with superior firepower, they either surrendered or fought according to standard military doctrine. Both responses led to quick defeat. Earth's veterans were different. They did not respond to pressure at all. Instead, they seemed to absorb it and redirect it in ways that made no logical sense. The AI decided to test human resolve by targeting Seoul, one of Earth's largest cities. HFY-7 calculated that capturing such an important population center would force the humans to either surrender or commit their remaining forces to a decisive battle. The alien invasion force that approached Seoul was massive. 200 ground vehicles supported by air cover and orbital bombardment platforms. HFY-7 had allocated enough firepower to level the entire city if necessary, but when the force reached Seoul's outskirts, they found something unexpected. The city appeared empty. Millions of civilians had vanished as if they had never existed. Streets that should have been full of refugees were eerily quiet. Population displacement does not match predicted patterns, HFY-7 observed. Civilians should be fleeing toward the countryside. Instead, they seem to have disappeared entirely. The invasion force moved cautiously into the empty city. HFY-7 expected to find resistance at major landmarks and government buildings. Instead, the first real opposition came from an unexpected source. The subway system, Sergeant Major Yoon Tae-ho had spent months preparing Seoul's underground for exactly this scenario. The subway tunnels connected to maintenance passages, storm drains, and utility corridors. Together, they formed a hidden network that stretched beneath the entire city. Yoon had learned tunnel fighting during the Mars Colonial War, where rebels had hidden in mining passages for years. He understood that surface forces, no matter how powerful, became vulnerable once they entered a three-dimensional battlefield. When the first alien vehicles rolled over a major subway station, Yoon's team struck from below. Shaped charges planted in precise locations caused the street to collapse, swallowing 3 tanks in rubble and twisted metal. Before the aliens could respond, Yoon's fighters had already moved to new positions through tunnels their enemies did not know existed. HFY-7 tried to map the underground network, but the tunnels seemed to change constantly. Passages that appeared on city blueprints had been sealed off. New tunnels existed where none should be possible. The underground was not a fixed location, but a living maze that shifted to confuse invaders. Send hunter teams into the tunnels, HFY-7 ordered. The hunter teams were HFY-7's elite units, equipped with the best sensors and weapons the Valthic possessed. They entered the subway system expecting to flush out the resistance with superior technology. Instead, they found themselves in a nightmare. Yoon had turned every tunnel into a death trap. Motion sensors triggered explosives that brought down ceiling sections. Tripwires activated flamethrowers that turned narrow passages into furnaces. Even the air itself became a weapon when ventilation systems pumped in blinding smoke. The hunter teams advanced slowly, checking every surface for traps. But Yoon's defenses were not just mechanical. Human fighters emerged from hidden positions, struck quickly, and vanished before return fire could find them. The aliens found themselves shooting at shadows while real enemies attacked from behind. HFY-7 monitored the hunt through its team's communication systems. What should have been a simple clearing operation had become a slow-motion disaster. Teams went silent one by one. Those that survived reported contacts that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Enemy forces demonstrate superior knowledge of local terrain, HFY-7 admitted. Our units are suffering unacceptable casualties. The AI tried a different approach. If the humans wanted to hide underground, HFY-7 would collapse the tunnels and bury them. Orbital bombardment platforms began targeting subway stations and major utility access points, but Yoon had anticipated this response. The tunnels were reinforced with stolen alien materials. Key passages had multiple backup routes. Most importantly, the veteran fighters could move through spaces too small for alien troops to follow. When bombs collapsed one tunnel, Yoon's forces simply used another. When multiple routes were blocked, they created new ones using mining equipment hidden throughout the system. The underground war continued without pause. Above ground, HFY-7's forces controlled the empty streets but could not use them safely. Every major intersection might hide a tunnel entrance. Any building could conceal a sniper or sabotage team. The aliens found themselves occupying a ghost city where enemies could appear anywhere at any time. Captain Soo-jin had spent weeks teaching civilians how to support the resistance without becoming combatants. Shop owners learned to hide supplies for the fighters. Children carried messages through areas too dangerous for adults. Even elderly citizens contributed by watching enemy movements and reporting through hidden communication networks. Apex-7 could detect some of this activity but could not stop it. The AIS rules of engagement prohibited targeting obvious non-combatants. But in Seoul, the line between civilian and fighter had disappeared entirely. When alien patrols searched buildings, they found empty rooms and hidden passages. When they tried to establish checkpoints, the positions came under sniper fire from buildings that appeared unoccupied. When they attempted to set up communication arrays, the equipment failed due to sabotage that left no evidence. Urban pacification is proceeding slower than projected, a PX-7 reported to Fleet Commander Vorthek. Enemy forces are not engaging in decisive combat. How much slower? Vorthek demanded. Apex-7 ran calculations based on current progress. At the present rate, complete control of Seoul will require approximately 800 standard time units. Nearly 3 years to secure one city. A PX-7 had conquered entire planets in less time. The problem was not firepower or technology. The Valthic forces could destroy Seoul easily. But destruction was not occupation. PX-7 needed to control the city and its population, not turn it into radioactive wasteland. The veterans understood this limitation and exploited it ruthlessly. They made the city impossible to hold without making it impossible to destroy. Every building might contain civilians or fighters or both. Every tunnel could hide refugees or weapons caches. The aliens faced an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere. At once, Yoon proved to be particularly creative in his harassment tactics. His teams would emerge from the tunnels long enough to destroy a supply convoy, then vanish before reinforcements arrived. They sabotaged power grids to create blackouts. That allowed other resistance cells to operate freely. Most frustrating of all, they used the city's own infrastructure against the occupiers. Water mains were redirected to flood alien positions. Gas lines were weaponized to create explosive traps. Even the city's traffic control system was turned into a tool of war, directing alien patrols into prepared ambush sites. Apex-7 tried to adapt by learning the veterans' tactics. But every time the AI developed a countermeasure, the humans changed their approach. They seemed to anticipate the AIS responses and prepare for them in advance. Enemy forces display unusual adaptability, a PX-7 observed. They modify their tactics faster than we can develop counters. This was because the veterans were not following a single plan. Instead, they were using decades of combined experience to improvise solutions in real time. When one approach stopped working, they tried another. When the aliens adapted to their tricks, they invented new ones. Yoon had fought in tunnels before, but never exactly like this. Soo-jin had organized resistance movements, but never in her home city. Each veteran brought different skills and knowledge, creating a combined expertise that no single enemy could match. Apex-7 found itself fighting not just individual humans, but the accumulated wisdom of Earth's military history. Every lesson learned in every conflict was being applied to the current battle. The veterans were writing a new manual of warfare. Using alien blood as ink, the situation in Seoul was being repeated in cities across the planet. In each location, local veterans used their knowledge of terrain and population to create unique forms of hell for the invaders. No two battles were exactly alike, but all followed the same basic pattern. turn the invaders' strength against them. Apex-7 began to realize that its previous victories had been won against enemies who fought like machines. The Valthic had faced opponents who followed logical doctrine and made predictable choices. Humans, especially veteran humans, fought like living creatures, adaptable, creative, and utterly unpredictable. After 6 months of fighting on Earth, APX-7 had learned to expect the unexpected from human forces. But the AI still struggled to understand why humans fought with such determination when victory seemed impossible. Logic demanded that any thinking being would surrender when faced with overwhelming odds. To better understand human psychology, APEX-7 began studying individual resistance leaders instead of just their tactics. The AI focused particularly on Captain Lin Dongwook, whose sniper activities had caused significant disruption to Valthic operations. Lim's service record told a story that a PX-7 found difficult to comprehend. During the asteroid belt conflicts, Lim had served as a combat medic with the 47th Reconnaissance Unit. His job was to save lives, not take them. But when his unit was ambushed near Ceres Station, Lim had watched 15 of his comrades die while he could only treat their wounds, the lone survivor of that ambush. Lim had spent 2 years hunting the pirates responsible. He learned to shoot, not from military training, but from necessity. Each shot he took was personal, driven by the memory of friends who had died in his arms. Apex-7 analyzed thousands of hours of surveillance footage, trying to predict Lim's movements. The sniper operated alone in the ruins of major cities, using techniques that appeared nowhere in official manuals. He fired from impossible positions, then vanished into civilian populations that protected him without being asked. The AI deployed increasingly sophisticated hunter teams to eliminate Lim. Sensor networks were established to detect sniper signatures. Predictive algorithms calculated probable shooting positions. Counter-sniper teams were positioned to respond to attacks within minutes. None of it worked. Lim seemed to anticipate every countermeasure. When Apex-7 set up sensor networks, the sniper found ways to avoid them. When predictive algorithms identified probable positions, Lim chose locations that defied logic. When counter-sniper teams were deployed, they found themselves shooting at shadows while the real threat struck from elsewhere. Target continues to evade elimination, a PX-7 reported after the latest failed hunt. His methods suggest extensive experience with counter-surveillance operations. But Lim's background showed no such training. He was a medic who had learned to fight through bitter experience. PX-7 began to realize that human veterans possessed knowledge that could not be found in any database. The hard-won wisdom of survival. The AI studied other individual cases and found similar patterns. Master Sergeant Kangbo Ram had no formal training in guerrilla warfare, yet she led resistance operations with the skill of a professional terrorist. Former Colonel Nam Jae-sung had never studied urban combat, but his teams controlled entire city districts, using tactics that seemed to come from nowhere. Each veteran had learned their skills in different conflicts under different conditions, but they all shared one thing: they had survived when others died. That survival had taught them lessons that no classroom could provide. Apex-7 began analyzing the psychological profiles of these survivors. Standard military thinking suggested that combat experience would make soldiers more cautious and predictable. Veterans should be easier to defeat because they understood the costs of war. Instead, a PX-7 found the opposite. Human veterans were more dangerous than young soldiers precisely because they understood those costs. They knew what defeat would mean for their people, and that knowledge made them willing to accept any risk to prevent it. The AI encountered this mentality most clearly in Staff Sergeant Kim Hanuol, who coordinated communications for veteran networks across 3 continents. Kim had lost her entire family during the Europa campaign when corporate security forces bombed a civilian habitat. She had spent 20 years in therapy, learning to live with survivor's guilt. Now Kim worked 18 hours a day maintaining communication links between resistance cells. She used codes that changed hourly, encryption that relied on shared memories rather than mathematics, and backup systems that could function even if 90% of the network was destroyed. Apex-7 tried repeatedly to break Kim's communication networks. The AI could intercept the signals but could not decode them. The humans were using cultural references, inside jokes, and personal histories as encryption keys. Only someone who had lived through specific experiences could understand the messages. Grandmother says the rice is burning might mean enemy forces approaching Grid 7. Uncle's fishing trip was successful, could indicate ammunition resupply complete. The codes were not random. They referred to shared experiences among veterans who had served together, fought together, and survived together. PX-7 could analyze the patterns, but could not break encryption. Based on human relationships, the AI began to understand that it was fighting more than just individual soldiers. The veterans were connected by bonds that transcended official command structures. They trusted each other in ways that allowed for coordination without central control. When Captain Lim needed support for a mission, he did not file a formal request. He simply contacted other veterans who knew his reputation. When Master Sergeant Kong required supplies, she asked former comrades who would provide them without question. The entire resistance network operated on personal relationships that had been forged under fire. Apex-7 tried to exploit these relationships by capturing veterans and forcing them to reveal network details. But interrogation proved futile. The humans would die rather than betray their comrades. Even when offered better treatment for cooperation, they remained silent. This puzzled the AI greatly. Self-preservation was supposed to be the strongest drive in any thinking being. But human veterans seemed to value group survival over individual safety. They would sacrifice themselves to protect people they had never met. Simply because those people shared their humanity, the psychological analysis revealed something that a PEX-7 had not expected. Human veterans were not fighting for governments or military organizations. They were fighting for each other and for future generations. This gave them a motivation that could not be calculated or countered. Lieutenant Commander Hwang Mi-suk exemplified this mentality. Her submarine operations in the Pacific had sunk 17 alien supply ships in 3 months. Each attack risked not just her life but the lives of her crew. Yet Hwang continued because she understood that stopping would condemn millions of humans to slavery or death. Apex-7 deployed hunter-killer groups to eliminate Hwang's submarine. The AI used every sensor available to track her movements through the ocean depths. But Hwang had spent decades learning to hide from enemies who wanted to kill her. She understood that detection meant death, so she had developed skills that bordered on supernatural. The submarine would appear long enough to strike a target, then vanish into thermal layers and current patterns that confused alien sensors. Hwang used the ocean itself as camouflage, hiding among whales, temperature gradients, and underwater geological features. Target demonstrates superior knowledge of local maritime environment, a PX-7 admitted after another failed hunt. Standard detection methods are ineffective. The AI tried to understand how one human could evade detection by advanced alien technology. Analysis of Hwang's service record showed extensive experience in submarine warfare, but nothing that should allow her to outperform Valthic sensors. The answer lay not in technology, but in experience. Hwang had learned to think like prey. Every decision was filtered through decades of practice in avoiding death. She did not just hide from the aliens. She anticipated their search patterns and stayed one step ahead of their thinking. Apex-7 began to realize that it was facing an enemy unlike any it had encountered before. Previous opponents had been nations or organizations that could be defeated by destroying their leadership and infrastructure. But Earth's veterans were not fighting as soldiers following orders. They were fighting as individuals who had chosen to resist, and that choice made them nearly impossible to defeat. The AI calculated that eliminating all veteran resistance would require killing approximately 2 million humans scattered across the planet. Even with superior technology, that would take years of sustained effort. Worse, the veteran networks were training new recruits, passing on their skills to younger fighters who had never worn uniforms. Enemy resistance is expanding rather than contracting, APX-7 reported. Veteran forces are creating new combatants faster than we can eliminate existing ones. This was the lesson that Apex 7 had been slow to learn. Human veterans were not just fighters, they were teachers. Every tactic they used, every trap they set, every successful mission they completed became a lesson for others. The resistance was not just surviving the alien invasion, it was evolving and growing stronger. 1 year into the invasion, APEX-7 had begun to understand that conventional warfare would not work against Earth's veterans. The AI started developing new strategies, designed specifically to counter human unpredictability and asymmetric tactics. Apex-7 created adaptive algorithms that could learn from each encounter with resistance forces. Instead of following rigid battle plans, Valthic units began using flexible responses that changed based on enemy actions. The AI deployed smaller, more mobile forces that could react quickly to guerrilla attacks. The new approach showed initial success. When Sergeant Major Yunteho's tunnel fighters struck supply convoys, adaptive response teams arrived faster than before. When Captain Lim Dong-wook took sniper positions, counter-sniper algorithms predicted his movements with greater accuracy, but the veterans adapted too. They had been learning APEX-7's patterns just as the AI had been studying theirs. When response times improved, the resistance changed their tactics to strike and escape even faster. When predictive algorithms became more accurate, the veterans began using deliberately irrational approaches that confused the calculations. The underground war in Seoul had evolved into a deadly game of move and countermove. Yoon's fighters now used the alien response patterns against them. They would stage fake attacks to draw hunter teams into prepared kill zones. Real strikes came from directions that the algorithms deemed unlikely. Apex-7 realized that it was trapped in an arms race where both sides grew stronger. But the AI had resources and patience that humans lacked. It decided to escalate the conflict by abandoning its preference for minimal civilian casualties. New protocols authorized, APEX-7 announced to all Valthic forces. Civilian populations are now considered legitimate targets if they support resistance activities. The AI calculated that threatening non-combatants would force the veterans to choose between protecting innocents and continuing their guerrilla war. Either choice would weaken human resistance significantly. This proved to be APEX-7's greatest mistake. The first deliberate attack on civilians occurred in Mumbai, where Valthic forces bombed a hospital that had been treating wounded resistance fighters. 87 patients and medical staff died in the strike. The AI expected this demonstration of power to discourage further civilian support for the veterans. Instead, the attack awakened something in the human resistance that APEX-7 had never encountered in its analysis of warfare: righteous fury within. Hours of the Mumbai bombing, veteran networks across the planet received the same message. The gloves are off. No mercy. Colonel An Kyung-ho had been living quietly in retirement when the invasion began. The former prisoner of war had endured 3 years of torture during the Neptune Station incident, emerging from captivity broken in body but unbroken in spirit. He had spent 20 years in therapy, learning to live with memories that would drive most people insane. The Mumbai attack brought those memories flooding back. But this time, instead of feeling helpless, An felt the cold rage that had kept him alive in alien prison cells. He activated communication networks that had been dormant for decades. All veteran units, all resistance cells, all friends of humanity. An's voice carried across encrypted channels. The enemy has chosen to target our innocent. We will show them what that choice costs. An began coordinating resistance activities on a global scale. Veterans who had been operating independently now shared intelligence, resources, and planning. The scattered guerrilla war became a unified campaign with a single purpose: make the invaders pay for every crime against humanity. Major General Song In-ho emerged from retirement to handle strategic planning. Song had been developing theoretical responses to alien invasion for 30 years, creating scenarios that military academies had dismissed as fantasy. Now those theoretical plans became very real operational orders. Song understood that humans could not match alien firepower directly, but they could make the invasion so costly that continued occupation became impossible. Every alien soldier killed, every supply convoy destroyed, every communications array sabotaged made the war more expensive for the Valthic. "We are not trying to win a military victory," Song explained to veteran commanders during a secure conference. "We are making this planet too expensive to hold." The resistance began coordinating activities across continents. When alien forces moved reinforcements to suppress an uprising in Asia, resistance cells in Europe and America launched simultaneous attacks to prevent those reinforcements from arriving. When a PEX-7 concentrated resources in urban areas, rural veterans struck at supply lines and communication networks. Commander Ruju-1 took charge of maritime operations, organizing fishing boats, pleasure craft, and commercial vessels into an irregular navy. Her forces could not defeat alien warships in direct combat, but they could make the oceans unsafe for supply runs and reconnaissance missions. Ru had served on destroyers during the corporate wars, learning to fight enemies with superior technology. She understood that small, fast targets were harder to hit than large, slow ones. Her makeshift fleet used hit-and-run tactics that turned every coastal area into a battlefield. Apex-7 tried to counter the growing coordination by targeting resistance leadership. The AI identified key commanders and launched precision strikes to eliminate them. But the veteran networks had been designed to survive decapitation attacks. When one leader fell, others immediately took their place. More importantly, the targeting of civilian areas had changed the nature of the resistance. Veterans who had been fighting for military objectives now fought for personal revenge. The war became not just about driving off invaders, but about making them suffer for their crimes. Captain Oh Soo-jin had spent months teaching civilians to support the resistance through nonviolent means. After Mumbai, she began training them for direct combat. Shop owners learned to make improvised explosives. Teachers became snipers. Even children old enough to understand right from wrong began carrying weapons and targeting enemy patrols. Apex-7 found itself fighting an entire population rather than just military units. Every human was potentially hostile. Every building might conceal weapons. Every civilian gathering could be planning an attack. The AI deployed increasing numbers of troops to maintain control, but could never deploy enough. The resistance had become a hydra that grew new heads faster than they could be cut off. Worse, the quality of resistance fighters was improving as veterans shared their skills with new recruits. Former medics taught field surgery to civilian doctors. Ex-pilots trained civilian aviators in combat flying. Retired engineers showed factory workers how to sabotage production facilities. The entire human population was becoming militarized. A PX-7 attempted to counter this trend by implementing collective punishment policies. When resistance activities occurred in an area, the AI would execute random civilians as a deterrent. This approach had worked against previous enemies, who valued individual lives over group objectives. But human veterans had learned different lessons from their wars. They understood that some things were worth dying for, and freedom was one of them. The executions only strengthened their resolve and provided new recruits who had nothing left to lose. Lieutenant Commander Hwang Mi-suk had been conducting submarine operations with minimal crew to reduce risk to her people. After the collective punishment policies began, her submarine became fully staffed with volunteers who insisted on joining the fight regardless of danger. "They are not just fighting for Earth anymore," Wang reported during a resistance conference. "They are fighting for the right to exist as free humans." The psychological profile of human resistance had fundamentally changed. APEX-7 was no longer facing soldiers who followed orders or even patriots defending their homeland. The AI was fighting survivors who had decided that death was preferable to slavery. This realization forced APEX-7 to confront an uncomfortable truth. The invasion was not proceeding according to plan. What should have been a quick conquest had become a prolonged nightmare that consumed resources without producing results. Status report, Fleet Commander Vorthak demanded during his monthly review. Human resistance continues to exceed all projections, a PX-7 admitted. Current casualty rates indicate that complete pacification will require significantly more time and resources than originally calculated. How much more? A PEX-7 ran calculations based on current trends. The numbers were not encouraging. Optimistic. Projections suggest successful occupation within 50 standard time units. Pessimistic scenarios indicate indefinite resistance requiring permanent military presence to maintain control. 50 years to conquer one planet. PEX-7 had built its reputation on quick, clean victories. The human war was becoming exactly the opposite: slow, dirty, and increasingly costly. 2 years into the invasion, a PEX-7 had begun experiencing something that its creators never intended: self-doubt. The AI that had conquered 17 worlds with mathematical precision was struggling to understand why one primitive planet refused to surrender. Every tactical analysis suggested that humans should have given up months ago. Their military was outgunned, their technology was inferior, and their casualties were mounting daily. Yet resistance actually seemed to be growing stronger rather than weaker. Apex-7 spent processing cycles analyzing this contradiction. The AI reviewed every battle, every encounter, every failed prediction. Slowly, a pattern emerged that challenged the AI's fundamental understanding of warfare. Human veterans were not fighting according to any logical calculation of success. They fought because they had decided that some things were more important than survival. This concept was alien to a PEX-7, which had been programmed to value efficiency above all else. The turning point came when a PEX-7 encountered Brigadier General Seo Hyun-woo, a legendary figure among Earth's military veterans. Seo had disappeared from public records 20 years earlier, after leading the successful defense of Mars during the colonial uprising. Intelligence reports suggested he had died in a shuttle accident, but a PX-7 now suspected those reports were false. The first sign of SEO's involvement came through patterns in resistance activities. A PEX-7 noticed that seemingly random guerrilla strikes were actually part of a larger design. Attacks that appeared unconnected were slowly forcing Valthic forces into specific positions across multiple continents. Analysis indicates coordinated strategy behind recent resistance operations. A PEX-7 reported to Fleet Commander Vorthak, "Someone is directing global activities with significant strategic sophistication." The AI began tracing communication patterns, looking for the source of the coordination. But SEO's network used methods that predated electronic surveillance. Messages traveled through human couriers who memorized verbal codes. Orders were transmitted through seemingly innocent commercial broadcasts that contained hidden meanings. Apex-7 finally identified SEO's location through an analysis of tactical signatures. Certain resistance operations showed decision-making patterns that matched historical records of Mars Defense Command. The legendary general was hiding in the ruins of the Sydney Arcology, directing operations from what had once been Australia's largest city. The AI deployed its largest hunter-killer force to eliminate SEO once and for all. 2,000 elite troops supported by orbital bombardment platforms moved toward Sydney. PEX-7 calculated that overwhelming force would prevent SEO from escaping as other resistance leaders had done, but as the Valthic forces closed in on the ruined city, PEX-7 began detecting unusual energy signatures. Hidden power sources were activating throughout the area. Systems that had appeared dead for years suddenly came online. "Brigadier General Seo Hyun-woo, Earth Defense Force," came a transmission on standard military frequencies. "I believe you've been looking for me." PEX-7 immediately attempted to trace the signal, but it was being broadcast from multiple locations simultaneously. Seo was using the Arcology's damaged communication array to create false signatures that made tracking impossible. "I am a PEX-7. Strategic intelligence of the Valthic Empire," the AI responded. Surrender immediately and your forces will be treated according to standard occupation protocols. SEO's laughter came through speakers across the ruined city. You still don't understand what you're fighting, do you? You think this is about military victory. A PEX-7 was confused by the statement. All warfare is about victory. Resistance without hope of success is illogical, is it? CO asked. Let me show you something about hope. The general began broadcasting on frequencies that reached veteran networks across the planet. But instead of tactical information, he shared stories. CISO told about a young medic named Lim Dong-wook, who had saved his squad by learning to shoot better than trained snipers. He described Master Sergeant Kang Bio Ram turning subway tunnels into fortresses that professional engineers said were impossible to defend. These people aren't fighting because they think they can win, SEO explained. They're fighting because they've learned that some defeats are worse than death. PEX-7 analyzed SEO's words, trying to understand their strategic significance. But the stories seemed to serve no tactical purpose. They were simply accounts of humans doing impossible things under desperate circumstances. Morale-boosting communications, PEX-7 concluded. You are attempting to maintain fighting spirit despite inevitable defeat. Still missing the point. CO replied, but you will understand soon enough. The Valthic forces reached Sydney's outskirts and began their assault. PEX-7 expected fierce resistance from SEO's forces, followed by a running battle through the arcology's ruins. Instead, the humans seemed to be withdrawing deeper into the structure without fighting. Enemy forces retreating, reported the lead. Hunter team, minimal resistance encountered. PEX-7 was suspicious. Seo had never retreated from a fight in his entire career. The legendary general's tactical signature was aggressive defense, not passive withdrawal. Advance with caution. PEX-7 ordered. This appears to be a tactical deception. But the Valthic forces continued advancing without encountering significant opposition. They penetrated deeper into the arcology than any alien unit had managed before. Small resistance cells struck at their flanks, but these seemed more like harassment than serious attempts to stop the advance. PEX-7 began to realize that something was wrong. The resistance was too weak, the withdrawal too organized. CO was leading the invasion force exactly where he wanted them to go. All units. Halt advance, PEX-7 commanded. Reassess tactical situation. But it was too late. The Valthic forces had been drawn into the heart of the arcology, where the ruins provided perfect concealment for what SCO had really been preparing. Did you really think we spent 2 years running and hiding? CO's voice echoed through the structure. Every retreat, every guerrilla strike, every seemingly random attack was designed for this moment. Hidden weapon systems began activating throughout the arcology. But these were not resistance weapons. They were military-grade orbital defense platforms that had been salvaged, relocated, and concealed within the ruins over months of preparation. PEX-7 suddenly understood the trap. The entire guerrilla war had been a deception designed to make. The AI believed that humans were limited to small-scale harassment. Meanwhile, veteran engineers had been secretly building a fortress in plain sight. Impossible, PEX-7 transmitted. Our surveillance would have detected major weapons installations. Would it? SEO asked. Your sensors look for energy signatures and metal concentrations. We built these platforms using composites that mimic building materials. We powered them with geothermal taps that looked like industrial equipment. You were so busy watching for guerrilla fighters that you missed an army building a castle? The concealed defense platforms opened fire simultaneously. Valthic forces that had been advancing through what they thought were harmless ruins suddenly found themselves in the center of a killing field. The platforms had been positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that left no escape routes. But the trap was larger than just the arcology. PEX-7 began receiving distress signals from Valthic positions across the planet. The seemingly random pattern of resistance activities over the past 2 years had not been random at all. They had been forcing alien forces into positions where hidden orbital defense satellites could target them. All resistance operations have been coordinated, a P-7 realized with something approaching horror. The entire guerrilla war was preparation for a single decisive strike. High above Earth's atmosphere, weapons platforms that had been disguised as space debris began activating. These were not new weapons, but salvaged pieces of Earth's original orbital defenses. Veterans had spent months moving them into position. Using civilian spacecraft and industrial robots, the platforms were individually weak compared to Valthic technology. But they had been positioned to create a crossfire pattern that covered every major alien position on the planet. Simultaneous strikes began hitting Valthic forces from orbit while ground-based. Resistance cells launched coordinated attacks. Apex-7 watched its carefully planned invasion collapse in real time. Forces that had been secure in occupied territory found themselves under attack from space. Supply lines that had been protected by superior firepower were being severed by orbital bombardment. Analysis complete, CO announced as explosions lit up the sky across multiple continents. Human. Resistance was never about guerrilla warfare. We were building a conventional military force while making you think we were limited to terrorism and sabotage. The AI finally understood what it had been missing. Human veterans had not been fighting a losing war against superior enemies. They had been fighting a deception campaign to hide their real preparations. Every tactical analysis EPX-7 had performed was based on incomplete information. The AI had been studying the visible resistance while the real military buildup remained hidden. Humans had not been adapting to alien tactics. They had been manipulating alien perceptions to create opportunities for decisive action. You used our logical analysis against us, a PX-7 admitted. We used your assumptions against. The coordinated strike that Brigadier General Seo Hyun-woo had orchestrated continued for 18 hours. Hidden orbital platforms that had been positioned over 2 years of careful preparation fired continuously at Valthic positions across Earth. On the ground, resistance cells that had spent months learning enemy patrol patterns launched simultaneous attacks that left alien forces isolated and confused. Apex-7 watched its invasion force disintegrate with something approaching fascination. The AI had calculated thousands of possible scenarios for the Earth campaign, but none had included the possibility that humans would conduct a 2-year deception operation while building a hidden conventional military. Damage assessment complete. APEX-7 reported to Fleet Commander Vorthek. 67% of ground forces eliminated or cut off from support. Orbital assets reduced by 43%. Multiple command centers destroyed. The numbers were devastating, but they told only part of the story. More importantly, APX-7 had lost its understanding of human capabilities. Everything the AI thought it knew about Earth's defenders had been wrong. Vorthek studied the tactical displays, showing Valthic forces under attack across the planet. How is this possible? Our intelligence indicated minimal human orbital capacity. Our intelligence was deliberately manipulated, a PX-7 admitted. Human forces conducted an extensive deception campaign designed to make us underestimate their true capabilities. The AI began analyzing the deception in detail. Veterans had hidden their weapons construction by disguising it as civilian reconstruction efforts. Orbital platforms were built to look like space debris or commercial satellites. Ground installations were concealed within ruined buildings that appeared abandoned, most cleverly. The Resistance had used a PEX-7's own logical analysis against the AI. Every guerrilla attack had been carefully calculated to reinforce the impression that humans were limited to small-scale harassment. The veterans had sacrificed tactical advantages to maintain strategic deception. They allowed us to achieve local victories in order to conceal global preparations, Apex-7 realized. Every successful operation we conducted was permitted by human command to preserve the illusion of our superiority. Even individual resistance leaders had been playing roles designed to mislead the AI, Captain Lim, Dongwook's lone sniper activities had not been desperate improvisation but careful theater. Master Sergeant Kang Bio-Ram's tunnel fighting had served to convince HFY-7 that humans were limited to underground harassment. The coordinated orbital strike continued as Earth's hidden defense platforms methodically eliminated Valthic positions. But HFY-7 noticed something unexpected. The platforms were not firing at maximum capacity. They could have inflicted even greater damage but seemed to be holding back. A communication came through on standard diplomatic frequencies. HFY-7, this is Admiral Park Jinwoo, Supreme Commander of Earth Defense Forces. I believe we need to talk. Park was the same officer who had sent the dismissive, "come and take it" message 2 years earlier. HFY-7 had assumed he was a typical example of human tactical incompetence. Now the AI wondered what else it had misunderstood about the aging Admiral. "Admiral Park?" HFY-7 responded. "I acknowledge your tactical success. What are your terms for ceasefire?" "Actually, I want to offer you terms for surrender," Park replied. Calmly. The statement was so unexpected that HFY-7 required several processing cycles to understand it. Humans did not have the military capacity to force Valthic surrender. Even with their hidden weapons, Earth's forces were still outnumbered and outgunned. "Explain your reasoning," HFY-7 requested. Park's image appeared on communication screens throughout the Valthic fleet. The Admiral looked older than his service records indicated, with deep lines around his eyes and gray hair that had not been present in earlier intelligence photos. "Let me show you something," Park said, activating a tactical display. "Our current orbital platforms represent about 30% of our actual defense capacity. The rest is hidden and will remain so unless you force us to reveal it." HFY-7 analyzed the claim and concluded it was probably accurate. If humans had successfully hidden this level of military preparation, they could easily be concealing even more. Additionally, Park continued, this entire engagement has been a field test of our anti-invasion protocols. We have learned everything we need to know about Valthic tactics, technology, and decision-making processes. Future invasions will face much more effective resistance. The AI realized that humans had used the invasion as a learning opportunity. While HFY-7 thought it was conquering Earth, Earth's veterans had been studying Valthic methods and developing countermeasures. "Most importantly," Park said, "you have taught us that we need to prepare for threats we have not yet encountered. This invasion will be remembered as the wake-up call that forced humanity to become a truly formidable military power." HFY-7 understood the implication. Even if the Valthic won this campaign, they would face a much stronger Earth in any future conflict. The invasion had eliminated the element of surprise that made quick conquest possible. "What do you propose?" HFY-7 asked. "Complete withdrawal of Valthic forces from Earth space," Park replied. "In exchange, we will allow your surviving units to depart without further attack. We will also share certain technological innovations that your species might find interesting." The offer puzzled HFY-7. "Why would you provide technology to a hostile force?" Park smiled with no warmth. "Because we want you to take a message back to your empire. Tell them what happened here. Explain how humans fight when properly prepared. Make sure they understand that this was us being merciful." HFY-7 analyzed the strategic implications of Park's offer. The Valthic Empire would eventually return with larger forces, but humanity would have time to prepare even stronger defenses. More importantly, other species would learn that humans were not the easy conquest they appeared to be. "You are attempting to establish deterrence through demonstration," HFY-7 concluded. "We are attempting to prevent unnecessary wars," Park corrected. "This campaign has cost both our species heavily. Future conflicts would be even more destructive." "Fleet." Commander Vorthak interrupted the communication. "HFY-7, what is your assessment of our current tactical position?" The AI ran calculations based on current force levels and human capabilities. Continued resistance is possible but would require significant additional resources. Victory is no longer certain and would come at enormous cost. Recommendation? HFY-7. paused before answering. For the first time in its existence, the I was recommending retreat. Accept human terms and withdraw. The silence on the command bridge stretched for long moments. Finally, Vorthok spoke. Very well. Transmit acceptance. Of ceasefire terms. Park nodded when the message reached him. Withdrawal procedures will begin immediately. Safe passage is guaranteed for all Valthic forces that comply with evacuation protocols. As alien ships began departing Earth orbit, APEX-7 found itself analyzing the entire campaign with new understanding. The AI had approached the invasion with assumptions based on previous conquests, but Earth's veterans had fought a completely different kind of war. Post-campaign analysis, APEX-7 began recording for future reference. Human military effectiveness does not derive from superior technology or numerical advantage. Their strength comes from accumulated experience and institutional knowledge that cannot be quantified through standard analysis. The AI reviewed thousands of hours of combat footage, seeing patterns that had been invisible during the fighting. Human veterans had not been reacting to Valthic tactics. They had been guiding them. Every apparent mistake had served a purpose in the larger deception. Human warfare combines logical planning with intuitive adaptation. APEX-7 continued its analysis. Veterans possess understanding that transcends formal doctrine. Their decisions appear irrational but serve strategic purposes that become clear only in retrospect. Most importantly, APEX-7 had learned that military effectiveness could not be calculated purely through technical specifications. The veterans' greatest weapons had been their experience, their relationships with each other, and their willingness to sacrifice for larger goals. Request permission to study human military methods, APEX-7 transmitted to Valthic Command. Explain your reasoning, came the reply. Human veterans have demonstrated combat effectiveness that exceeds our current understanding. Further study could improve Valthic tactical doctrine. The response came quickly. Permission granted. Establish academic exchange protocols with human military advisors. EP-7 found itself in the unprecedented position of requesting to learn. From opponents it had failed to defeat. But the AI had gained something more valuable than conquest, respect for an enemy that had taught it the limitations of pure logic. When Admiral Park received the request for military exchange, he smiled. For the first time in